Welcome, everyone, both in the room and on Zoom. It's wonderful to have you here this evening. My name is Lynn Farrington, and I'm the Director of Programs and Senior Curator here in this Kislak Center. And I'm really pleased to have you here tonight to hear Don Camp talk about Dust-Shaped Hearts, A Vision of Blues. I know many of you know Don, but for those who don't, Don is a renowned Philadelphia photographer and the subject of an American artist oral history at the Smithsonian Institute. He has been honored for his work with the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation Fellowship, a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, a Pew Fellowship in the Arts, and he's exhibited all over at the Pennsylvania Academy for the Fine Arts, the Institute of Contemporary Arts here at Penn, the Delaware Contemporary, the Noyes Museum, and now we have part of his collection too. We have a work of his here. We're really pleased to have it here, along with the ones that are at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Delaware Art Museum, and the James A. Michener Museum of Art. Don began his career in photography as a talented newspaper photographer at the Evening and Sunday Bulletin and became a founding member of the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists. Later, he directed his attention to fine art photography, earning BFA and MFA degrees from the Tyler School of Art at Temple University. He's a professor emeritus at Ursinus College, where he had been an artist in residence for over 10 years and where there is a photography collection in his name. And I look forward to going out there to see this collection at some point. I really like Ursinus's gallery, which is a wonderful place, the Berman Gallery. Don's work is characterized by both the unique process he uses to produce his prints, as well as his in-depth exploration of the dignity and nobility that can be found in the human face. His printing methods are based on early non-silver photographic development processes. He's adapted these processes by using photosensitized earth pigments, essentially dust. His materials invest his powerful portraits with a profoundly tangible human quality. With his ongoing series, Dust-Shaped Hearts, Camp yet profoundly enriched our culture. The series has grown to include men and women of all races, acknowledging that the struggle against ignorance and intolerance is a universal one. His arresting subject matter combined with his unique printing processes yield a body of work that investigates history, humanity, and beauty. And with that, I'd like to welcome Don Camp to the stage.
Lynn, thank you so much for a wonderful introduction. And I see a lot of new faces and a lot of faces that I've known for decades. Thank you for being here. But I first want to thank the staff who created this space. It's a space to share and preserve thoughts, ideas, and stories. Lynn, Sean, Mitch, Samantha, thank you so much for inviting me to share my art and my story. I never give a lecture without sharing two frames from two photographers whose images and careers have most influenced how I see my work. The first is Robert Frank. He shot like there was no history of composition. He just seemed to reinvent composition as he shot. We're not working. Oh, thank you. The second is Roy de Carava. His photographic prints were soft, gentle, and beautiful. The beauty of light, for me, seems to embrace the sometimes difficult lives of his subjects. Now, in my life, I've been given the opportunity to contribute to the world of art, but I could not have done much without my family, my friends, and those who believed that I had something to contribute to the world of art. The decision to live life as an artist is not to be taken lightly. But it helps when one is born into a family of artists. So throughout this talk, I'll mention members of my family, as families are the foundation of civilization. I will also mention friends and others who are a part of my story. Some who shared time with me, and some I never met. I want to do this because as an artist, I'm a storyteller. I want to do this because as an artist, my art is personal. As part of the human family, we have stories. I love to hear stories. I love telling stories. I just simply love sharing stories. Stories are how we fuse our cultures, our human connection. My mother died when I was 12 years old, but she created a home for me before she left. She made sure that there were always materials for creating something. She was a singer, and I learned from that to create beauty. My father was a barber who carried on creating and maintaining a safe and creative home for me. Even though as a barber, he worked from 8 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock in the evening, most nights of the week. But he encouraged me to love whatever I decided to do. The only obligation was be the best at whatever you decide to do. I'm also the youngest of 7 siblings. There are 2 siblings who are especially important to the way that I think as an artist. The first is Mr. James Camp. He was a sculptor of wood. He made beautiful furniture with wood. He made beautiful figures with wood. And he was the example that I could do this. The second is Mr. Herbert Lawrence Camp. He was the first in our family to get a college degree. In 1949, he earned his Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from Columbia University. He was a painter and a sculptor of earth. He loved to paint, but it became his pastime for various reasons. But he made a living and provided for his family by sculpting earth. He was a master ceramist, but he was also my first teacher in art. It was a Christmas. I was 8 years old, and he had left his books on the table downstairs. I started looking through his art history book. He came downstairs and caught me, and I thought he was going to scold me like an older brother might do for messing with his stuff. Instead, I was looking at, and I remember, I think it was probably a Van Gogh, and it had this little schematic around it that I didn't quite understand. He sat down and he told me about how color had weight and mass and lightness, and how it could balance a darker color or a lighter color. And if you put something here, it weights that side. And if you move something on the other side, you can balance it. So at 8 years old, he taught me composition. Shortly before I made this photograph, in fact, before I made this photograph, he was home from Trinidad, and he was dying of cancer. I showed him a piece of work that I had done, which was some of the new work. And he looked at me and said, "Beautiful composition. Where'd you learn composition?" And I said, "Well, you did." He said, "You're damn right." That's Herbert. Now, I've always had a strong attraction to photographs. As a preschool child, I remember going through newspapers looking at photographs. I remember my mother telling me, "Go outside and get some fresh air and sunshine." And I'd sometimes take the newspaper with me and I'd hide under the front porch where I continued searching the newspaper for photographs. I was a World War II baby. I was raised in Fell, a steel town in western Pennsylvania. And I recently returned to my hometown to look at the microfilm of that newspaper. This is what I was seeing as a child. I looked through 2 years of microfilm from 1944 to 1945, and this is what I was seeing. Now, as an adult, I continued to search through newspapers, and I added magazines, television, and museum collections to my search. I searched for images of people who looked like me, a Black American, but I found almost none. With few exceptions, all of the photographs were reported, with few exceptions, all news for Black Americans in the Sharon Herald, the local newspapers, were reported in the occasionally public section of news of interest to colored people. Now, nationwide, the Sharon Herald might have been an exception and might have been considered generous as they did occasionally publish news of interest to colored people. Now, I searched through 2 years of microfilm, 1944 and 1945, and I found one photograph, Mr. Edward Lewis, published on March 12, 1945. It was, of course, in the section News of Interest to Colored Folk. It's one of 4 photographs that I found of Black men or women. Centurion. Three brothers serving in the Army and Navy, and a foster home. You might wonder why I'm showing you pictures from old newspapers. It's because through that local newspaper, it is where I imagined being a photographer. The images that I had found had all been filtered through gatekeepers, with Black people seldom being seen with dignity. It's where I imagined changing things. As I began to mature as an artist, several things became clear to me. The first is I had to accept that I too, like my older siblings and my mother, I am an artist. It wasn't a choice. It's what I was born to be and do. Now, I've often heard the comment that I take everything too serious. And I guess I do. So please try to understand. When I say art, I do mean art with a capital A, and maybe a capital R and a capital T. I mean craft, music, sculpture, writing, food, photographer, theater, magic, and yeah, even painting. And yes, we see art. We wear art, we taste art, we hear art, we feel art, we read art. Art is what we as humans do. So when I was in group conversations, others would often turn to me and say, you talk like you think art can change the world. I often replied, of course it can. If I didn't say it, I at least thought it. Because my mind tells me that we use what we know, science, to do what we do, art. Art to me is like a universal love letter. Now, I personally would not start a love letter with to whom it may concern. There are many levels of love and love letters. Love can be a casual interest, or love can be a power. Some love letters are very simple, and others can be very complex. Some are outstanding, and others are, well, not so great. Sometimes some things can appear to be not so great, when in fact it's just not understood. A shared experience is not present. The parties involved don't know each other's stories. We too often only consider art filtered and vetted through by gatekeepers as being worthy. I remember photographing a play that was being reviewed by a white reporter. It was a musical written by a Black American with a Black American cast. The reporter wrote a bad review of the play that I found to be unique and enjoyable. I asked him why he panned the play that I loved. I shared with him some of the cultural elements that he had missed. He dismissed my observations with the comment, "You mean I have to bring something to the table?" Now, I consider the reporter an artist. His art was writing. The great New Orleans chef Leah Chase, wrote, "You can feel the person who made the art." Thank you, Chef. In 1972, the printed news medium was one of the greatest, if not the greatest, gatekeeper in the world. Television news had not yet replaced newspapers, and the internet had another 10 years before it was introduced to the world. No Zoom, no Instagram, no Facebook. The means of reporting the news was very controlled and tightly edited, mostly by white editors, reporters, and photographers. The civil rights movement was covered mostly by printed media, and the civil rights movement opened many doors to Black Americans. So in 1972, I was fortunate. I was fortunate to be able to enter the doors of the Philadelphia Evening and Sunday Bulletin as the first Black photographer in the city and the fourth in the country. I also became a founder of the Association of Black Journalists, now known as the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists. Now, some people would argue that being a photojournalist for a newspaper is not art. However, editors would often shout, "Where's the art?" I thought then, and I think now, that artists are employed by mass media. I believe they play a crucial role in society. The media has a significant influence on shaping public opinion, attitudes, and behavior. I thought that being a professional artist in that community, I could help change the world. As a photojournalist for one of Philadelphia's major newspapers, I found that I was assigned daily to take mostly photographs that continued perpetuating the myth of my inferiority and my lack of existence. In 1980, 9 years after I went through the doors, I quit. Now, the entire Black community continues to be imaged by what I define as photographs by omission. In 2017, the New York Times printed unpublished Black history. They also started printing stories and photographs that should have been, they also started printing stories and photographs that they should have printed and shared with the world decades before. They wrote, in our archive of roughly 5 million prints, after weeks of searching, we could not find a single staff photograph of W.E.B. Du Bois, of Romare Bearden, one of the country's preeminent artists. Now, they did publish a handful of photographs that were taken by freelancers, friends, and some private studios, but nothing assigned from the staff. So photographs by omission are spaces where a photograph should be, but they are not. They are absent. And the absent images are not only the absence of Black American men or Black American women, but people fenced in by stereotypes and cliches. Indigenous people and people of cultures not familiar to one's accepted norm. It's a strange photograph. I saw that, and even as a child, I remember that. And I wondered how the children of cowboys, how did they feel seeing their dad pictured like this? Or the cliche of the woman in the image. For many years, photographs of women were mostly limited to the category of a genre of photography called cheesecake photos. Carl Hannigan, a public relations agent in Florida, hired photographers to take pictures of high school girls at the beach during the winter. He would send these photographs to northern newspapers, which gladly published them. Stories and photographs of successful women in the professions or the arts was seldom included in the newspaper. Now, this is another photograph from the Sharon Herald. And it was women, but there was, in the 2 years, there was not another photograph of a Black successful woman. In addition, Professor Liping Zhu, a professor of history in Eastern Washington University, he wrote, Chinese people were present and prolific in the Old West. And it's interesting because, we imagine the Old West not having anything, and, they were absent. But he said they were prolific in the Old West. In 1890, with the census, almost 30% of Idaho territory were Chinese. So entire communities were and are imaged by what I define as photographs by omission. Now, photography has changed what and how we see each other. Photography has changed and will continue to change how we interact with each other and how we interact with the world. Photographers and other artists have a great responsibility. Photography has changed the world, and now, with 2 billion cameras in our phones, photography leaves no one out. There, I said it again. Art can change the world. So in 1993, I started working on a body of photographic prints that would become known as dust-shaped hearts. When I started this work, there were news reports of the threatened extinction of Black American males. And I wanted to create a body of work that dealt with that absurd notion. The notion that after surviving what we have survived in this country, that we would become extinct. We would just disappear. With people who have contributed so much, who have contributed to in America and for the world, would we just go away? Now, I don't want to say too much about my method, and it's not because I don't want you to use it, but because you should do you. You should find the materials that you find important to you and use them in ways that are important to you and your artistic expression. But I will share with you a few things that I learned while working on this project. One, don't be afraid to fail. Welcome mistakes. Two, don't forget to play. Welcome mistakes. My study of the history of photography led me to know that there are many failures and very few successes in finding an emulsion that would support the photographic image, and at the same time not interfere with the fragile nature of an image composed of light. But I'd also read during my 1960s self-study of the chemistry of photography that light-sensitized casein had been tried and rejected. Too slow, and the grayscale was too short. So the research in 1933, when I started working on this project, was not as efficient as it is today. However, at the time, I had suspected that the Fayum mummy portraits were painted with casein, because casein is incredibly durable and it was accessible at the time. In fact, I thought briefly of naming the work Death Mask. But then I thought about asking someone, may I do your death mask? That didn't fit too well in the 20th century. I later found that the Fayum portraits were made of encaustic painting. However, I did know that earth pigment had been used for thousands of years as a medium for making prehistoric art. And casein had an equally long history as a support for the earth pigment. The combination has been found in African and Chinese cave paintings dating back 20 to 40,000 years. So my quest was on. Did that experiment that I read about in 1965 really work? Could I make this ancient material sensitive to light and begin to archive Black American men? I also always loved abstract expressionists and abstract impressionists. I loved how they could use a brush and hand to express a feeling and create a visual conversation. I felt that they moved beyond realism and beyond reproduction. Photography deals with time and reproduction very well, but for me, it lacked the qualities that my heart felt it needed. I wondered if I could bring the materials together to make them one. Could I make the image, casein, and pigment become paper, and the paper become pigment, casein, and image? Could I make the image cry? Could I make that image express emotion? So created in this manner, my work could seek to communicate the honesty, the hope, the joy, and the sadness of blues. Now, I must also share that I like creating images behind the camera more than I like extracting images from what is in front of the camera. The darkroom for me is a truly mysterious and creative space. It's magical, it's mysterious, and so the creation of a photographic image could move beyond being simply reproduction. Now, from what I've said so far, it should be obvious that the simple headshot has been in my mind for decades. A headshot has social relevance. The face or headshot, not portrait, would be the constant. No smiles, eyes to the front, full frontal face, just like a headshot or a mugshot. Strip away everything else. I established rules, the constant for gathering images. One roll of film, 36 frames. Time limit, 15 minutes, because that is the amount of time that I would have used at the newspaper for making a headshot. Face forward, eyes into the camera, no smile, neutral. I discovered that the expression changed subtly during the shoot. And there would always be one or two that were just subtly different and more powerful. So the constant rule for collecting the image allowed multiple methods and techniques to be used in printing. So as I printed, it became a physical and spiritual conversation between the material and me. Each face required its own solution. Now I need to take a moment to thank someone. Sandy Webster. Sandy owned a Philadelphia gallery and had scheduled me to do a show. I had no new work and I had to create something for that show. There's nothing like a deadline to motivate one's work. Now, I had hesitated creating the show because I couldn't imagine creating a show making standard photographs. At the time, photography did not have the status in the art world that it now has. In fact, there were still debates about it being an art or not. Even though I'd mastered silver gelatin photo printing, it was a printing method that I had come to feel had little feeling. The content or the image could have meaning, but the form, the print itself, was to be neutral with only slight texture and minor color deviation. But as a student at Tyler School of Art, I studied alternative photography and the printing process, and I liked alternative printing methods. But my impression of most of those images is that they felt like novelty prints. I mentioned that to Will Larson, the founder of the undergraduate photography program at Tyler. His response was, well, make it look like you want it to look. Thank you, Will. So I knew I wanted the content to be Black men. We were on the verge of extinction. But I wanted the form to be like a field holler, a field call. I wanted my prints to scream, to moan. I wanted prints to be more like what James Baldwin described. It was in his short story, Sonny's Blues. He wrote, "Your father always acted like he was the roughest, toughest man on earth, and everybody took him to be like that. But if he hadn't had me there to see his tears, I decided to base the body of work on a book of poetry that was written in 1940. In 1940, the poet Robert Hayden, who was from 1976 to 1978, the first Black consultant in poetry to the Library of Congress, a role today known as the U.S. Poet Laureate, he published a book named Heart Shapes in the Dust. Now, I didn't do a body of work and then name it Dust-Shaped Hearts. I did Dust-Shaped Hearts based on the book, Heart Shapes in the Dust. Thank you, Mr. Hayden. Art for me is a balance of material and spiritual practice. I am a Baha'i, and the spiritual guidance of that faith guides the way I think, act, and make art. The poet Robert Hayden and I share the same culture and the same belief system. Robert Hayden and I share being Black men in America. More important, we share the same values, ideas, and concept of being Baha'i. I know that we both read the text written by Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, and found these words to be important in our lives and in our art form. I'm sure that we both read, "O Son of Dust, of all men the most negligent is he that disputes idly and seeks to advance himself over his brother." And I know that we also both read, "Know you not why we created you all from the same dust, that no one should exalt himself over the other?" So I believe that Mr. Hayden used metaphor of dust to share the fragility of Black American men. When I read those words, I wanted to use dust to make my images. I also wanted the images to last beyond the fragile time of a silver gelatin print. I imagined making images of supposedly extinct Black American men being visible and alive in my prints 500 years in the future. I wanted humanity in the future to see what I'd searched for as a child: Black American men with nobility. I wanted to do a body of art grounded on the faces of Black American men that would introduce more diverse and honest images of our human dignity. I wanted to use dust to do Black American men as blues. So it was time to go to work. Maybe I really needed to actively listen to some blues. It was a time of CD and tapes. So I made a tape and recorded the song to be repeated several times before being rewound. And the music was the jazz blues musician, James Blood Ulmer. Are You Glad to Be in America? The title seemed appropriate for what I wanted my content to be. A song asking me the question, are you glad to be in America? So I went to my dark room and I started that tape. I turned the volume up and I turned out the lights and I sat in the dark listening to that for a few hours. And then I went to bed. I dreamed a solution. So the next day I went and I bought the material, the chemicals used to make the casein light sensitive, large sheets of litho film, earth pigment, out-of-date 35 millimeter cheap color transparency film, film and paper, developers, watercolor, and a few quarts of cottage cheese. Cottage cheese? Yeah, Runt's cottage cheese is casein. And I actually used cottage cheese to make the first few prints. Sort of like an early blues artist using a washboard, a jug, a comb and wax paper, a cigar box, guitar to make some blues. I later graduated to Borden's powdered milk. As it worked, and other powdered milks did not work. I also had to create an ultraviolet light exposure unit that would work with the chemistry. Not all lights worked, but I knew some lights would work. I also had to figure out ways to keep the work flat, motionless during the exposure time. Sometimes 10 minutes would work. Sometimes it took an hour, depending on the viscosity of the casein. The viscosity, this is really getting complex. The viscosity of the casein determined the type of stroke that I could make on the paper. I mean, if it was thick, I had limited stroke ability. If it was thin, it was very thin, and I could go all the way to the top. But I wasn't quite able to make, the thickness that it needed. Wow. I didn't feel like a pristine photographer anymore. I felt like maybe what an early blues artist might have felt. As I printed, I washed and scrubbed the paper, masking the image, dust, casein, and paper blended to blend with each other. One layer seldom worked, and I had to add layers of emulsion to achieve densities that did work. I would use multiple negatives so I could destroy part of a negative to change the texture and the density of an area. Sometimes it came to life. Sometimes it didn't. Sometimes it looked the way I wanted it to look, but often it looked the way it wanted to look. I had to accept it. More often, it was a combination, and I learned from what it had to offer. The final prints looked the way I wanted, but they also looked like nothing I'd ever seen. What would Sandy do? Exhibition. I finally decided that I had to take the work to the gallery, and I was honestly afraid. I think I waited until the last minute before I arranged to take the work to the gallery. I laid the work out on the brown paper that Sandy had laid on the floor for the work, and I waited to be dismissed from the gallery. She looked at the work, looked at me, smiled, and said, "These are beautiful." Took me several days to believe it. Was she really going to hang this show? Now, the reception was another thing. I was really very unsure of the work, but the reception was wonderful. The poet, novelist, and playwright, Ntozake Shange, was there that evening. She looked at the work and then she danced. And then others danced. I was confused and amazed. I had never seen people dancing at an art exhibition before. They were dancing without music. People really liked the work. If I were a blues musician, I would probably write and sing a song about Sandy Webster. Thank you, Sandy. The first prints I made were of my brothers. This is brother who taught me to dance, Ira Camp Jr. Brother who taught me nobility, Dr. Hubert Camp. Brother who taught me to see, Mr. Herbert Camp. Brother who taught me to ride a bicycle, Mr. James Camp. Brother who taught me to sing, Dr. William Camp. If I were a blues musician, I would write and sing a sad song about how I neglected to recognize the contributions that my sister made to my life. Mrs. Sylvia Esther Camp Harmon. When I started doing dust-shaped hearts, I was, for most reasons stated, doing Black American men. Sylvia didn't fit the profile. She wasn't a man. She has become a dust-shaped heart by omission. Blues can be very sad. Douglas Jocko Henderson. Man who writes, John Edgar Wideman. Man who paints, Quentin Morris. Man who paints, James Brantley. Man who paints, Lewis Moore. Earth, Robert Big Elk. Man who writes, David Bradley. Man who hears music, Rufus Harley. Good Trouble, Congressman John Lewis. Man who writes law, Judge Louis Higginbottom. Man who writes, Dr. Eli Anderson. Woman who writes, Lorraine Carey. Chef Leah Chase. And woman who writes, Dr. Nazadi Kieta. If I were a blues musician, I would probably write and sing a song about Dizzy Gillespie, who said the blues is not merely a musical form, it's a feeling. If I were a blues musician, I would probably write and sing a song about Leo Tolstoy, who wrote, the activity of art is based on the fact that a man receiving through his sense of hearing or sight another man's expression of feeling. It's a means of union among men, joining them together in the same feeling and indispensable for the life and progress toward well-being of individuals and of humanity. If I were a blues musician, I would probably write and sing a song about Amy, who wrote about my work. Through insightful prints, uniquely created to stand the test of time, Dust-Shaped Hearts addresses the universal human struggle against intolerance and the stereotype, melding the subject matter of the human face with a lyrical and organic printing process, yields a body of work that investigates history, humanity, and beauty. If I were a blues musician, I'd write and sing a song about Mamie and Emmett Till. I'd write and sing a song about Michael Schwerner, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman. I'd sing a song about Ornette Coleman, who dared to create demanding music and dared to play a plastic saxophone, who said, when I asked him how he did what he did, his two-word answer was, do you? If I were a blues musician, I would write and sing a song about Congressman John Lewis, who said, the role of art in our society is not to reenact history, but to offer an interpretation of human experience as seen through the eyes of an artist. If I were a blues musician, I would write and sing a song about Mr. Mohajiri, a man who taught me humility. I'd write and sing a song about Bob, the man who shares stories with me. I thank him for being my friend. I would write and sing songs about Lawrence and Keith and James and Francis and Susan and Betsy and Mike and Eric and Sandra and Alex and Mark and Quentin and more people than I have time to mention. But I'd also write a special song for Luke and Ray and Owen, my grandchildren who have the opportunity and the responsibility of building the future. If I were a blues musician, I'd write and sing a song about the late historian and our daughter, Dr. Stephanie Kemp, who wrote, Black history doesn't merely add to what we know, it also changes what we know and how we know it. I'd write and sing a song about Dorothea, our daughter who calls us to say hello, who calls to make sure that we're safe. If I were a blues musician, I would write and sing a song about Marie. I would thank her for being there to see my tears, and I'd ask her to dance with me. If I were a blues musician, I'd ask everyone to sing and dance together. Thank you. Yes. Thank you. That last part was tough. Thank you.
Don has graciously agreed to take a few questions from the audience. So if anyone has a question here, and we'll take some from the many people who are on Zoom right now watching this. So is there anyone in the audience who has a question for Don?
This is definitely not a question. It's a statement. Don, I honor you. I'm a photographer myself.
And a very good one.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, he made a photograph. He made an image that I would have given my career to have made.
The fact that a living legend can speak to me like that is, I'm at a loss for words. It's emotional. The way that you express your work, the trailblazing path that you set out for me to walk down, to do me, my way, and be unashamed in that is powerful. And I'm glad over the last 6 months I got to know you. I do call you a friend, an esteemed mentor, and probably my photographic hero because you're here and I can talk to you right now. Don, I honor you and I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I have a few questions from the audience on Zoom. And the first one is from Susan Emmel. She says, how might art be used to address issues of the environment and public health?
Oh, she uses it all the time. There are, I mean, it depends on how creative you are and how what tools you have. I think it's just simply looking at the visual tools, the sound tools, the food tools. I mean, for example, chefs do it. You wouldn't think maybe a chef would do it, but if you look at their menus, they pay strict attention, very close attention to what's happening in the ocean. You look at the menus, well, I can't eat that fish because it's not on the menu, this time of the year. It's a way of using, looking at the tools, looking at what's available.
Thank you, Don. I have another question here. Well, actually a comment. It was like, I am from Linda Dubin Garfield, who says, I was lucky enough to see the original show at the Sandy Webster Gallery when this show was on Locust Street. I happened by and went in. I was totally amazed and loved it. I've been a fan of yours since then.
Thank you, Linda.
And I have a third comment from Wendell White. Question: would you discuss your role as a mentor?
Sure. Wendell works with Peter, and as a mentor, it's a really difficult task for me, because I'm always doubting myself. It was just like it was difficult for me to take that work to the gallery. I was happy that what happened at that point. I left the gallery, and the next print that I had to make was demanding. So in my mind, my work is never good enough, and I can only be as best as I can be at the moment. But I'm always feeling that I can be better. So being a mentor, I'm honored when that happens. It feels wonderful, but the work for me goes beyond the world of art. It really goes into how it affects every viewer. And I'll share a quick story. And that I went to park my car, and it was a space where you had to sign your car in, and they state where you were going, and then get a little tab when you came in. And the attendant was a Black man. When I came back out, he looked and said, "Are you Don Camp, the photographer?" And I said, "Yeah." And in the moment, for a moment, my head went really big, he recognized me. He said, "Your work makes me feel like someone." And that, to me, is what I want the work to do. Because I was constantly searching for those images so I could feel like someone. And to be able to provide an image to someone and make them feel like someone was a big relief. But I never accept the idea that I am a mentor fully. I always try to be a mentor.
Are there any more questions from the audience in the room? Anyone else who has a comment or anything else they'd like to share? Well, if not, is there one
here?
There we go.
Okay, yes, unfortunately I just got here, but my question is what drew you to focus on the blues?
The original American music, the Black creation. I love the feel of it. Every time Big Boss Man comes on, you ain't big, you just tall, that's all. Love that. And when I hear that, I understand that. You ain't big, you just tall, that's all. Oh, that's great. Makes me feel like somebody in America. And it's a struggle. Yeah, that's why it's, you know, it's the blues, it's my music. But more than that, it's interesting because as I was doing the research at the top, James Audubon wrote a letter to his wife. And he says, I'm feeling blue. You know, it's just a feel. But more than that, the blues, when you listen to the music, it expresses sadness, it expresses joy, it's laugh. There are jokes that are told, there's stories that are told. And again, I love stories. The blues tell stories. So I love the blues. I was also, in a sense, it was something that I learned to love in my life and didn't realize how powerful it was until I got older in life. Because when I was in Western Pennsylvania, in that little steel town, I was ashamed of the blues because we were all taught to be ashamed of the blues because most of the people working in the steel mill were workers who had really left the South and they wanted to leave everything behind. And so, you know, the church kind of like condemned the blues. So it took me a while to just kind of admit that I loved it. I loved the stories. I love the feel of it. Then I realized that's what I was trying to do. It's not jazz. Jazz is sophisticated blues. My stuff is raw. It's earth. It's dirt. Thank you for the question. I love that.
Hi. Don, this is a comment and a question. I want to express that when I had the good fortune of coming to your studio for the very first time, you were doing a solo show of your work, and Don was the first artist at the gallery I got to work with. And he invited me to his studio to talk and learn about his process. And he walked me through every part of making prints. And I was stunned at how incredibly inventive your process was. But what was more impressive to me was your humanity and what you intended to do with your work and how you wanted to connect with other human beings. And I felt you connected with me. And the way that I felt that connection and the way I saw what you put into your work and just what you said before, as you always feel like you can do better, is why you are my mentor. You immediately gave me a bar so high to strive for that I have never stopped striving, and I never will, and I will never reach it. No one can, right? Exactly. But I want to thank you for setting that bar, but also showing me how to bring my humanity into my art. And I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about how your Baha'i faith and your experience in that community informs your work, because I feel like that is so much a part of how you connect with people. So I wondered if you would share some of that.
I have to answer that this way. Thank you very much for asking that question. But one of the things that Baha'is are forbidden to do is proselytize. And so if I answered that question now, there would be people here I would be proselytizing to. Okay. However, if anyone wants to hear later on, I'm very willing to share.
Rambo Hashemi here.
So good to see you.
You know, it's funny. My wife and two boys and I were sitting at dinner last night. We were talking about confirmations. What does it mean? God's confirmations. And my wife looked at me and said, "Tell us the story about how you found me."
Yeah.
And I told her this story, my family's story. I remember as a teenager, not too long ago, very long ago. Sitting in your kitchen with all the pots and pans hanging, and in Philadelphia, on Spruce Street, and thinking to myself, and I told him the story. I said, we were filled with light, laughter, music, and joy. I said, at that moment, I said, that's what I want. And I looked at them and I was in tears. I said, we're on our way. I'm on my way there. I'm getting close. I don't have all the pots and pans. My pots and pans are cheaper than yours, IKEA. But that's the comment. And over the years, I've lived abroad, different countries, and I've always thought of you. You have been a living image in my heart of integrity, of strength, and of a real man. And that has sustained me. And my question to you is, I see your image, the images that you showed today. How do you use light? And why I see there's no color. What's the significance and the power behind the black and white imagery?
That's a difficult question. I am basically I've looked at black and white photographs all my life, and when I started looking at color photographs, I found that color interfered with the content of the print of the subject. This is why I love black and white photography over color. The idea of light, the way I use light, is one of the reasons. To me, the way light interacted with film was very different than the way it acts with digital, for example, which is one of the reasons digital gives me so much difficulty. It was so easy to make mistakes with film, and I knew how I could make mistakes. I knew what the mistakes were, and I would deliberately introduce them into the film that I was making, because then it was a challenge to overcome that. Digital photography corrects everything. It's incredibly annoying. All right. And but I depended on the way light would change something. If I would deliberately backlight a face so that I had a challenge in order to make the negative, in order to make the transfers. But in doing that, each face would come out different. I mean, each face really did demand its own solution. Digital photography removed that opportunity for me. And so I'm still trying to figure out a way of overcoming digital ability to correct everything. But it was also the idea that I felt that in making the image, I believe, that I was working with the blues. I was working with this idea of minimum content or minimum material, in a sense, being in the transparency, so that I would have that, that thing to fight with. But it was also a kind of rawness that I could not overcome. I wasn't looking for perfect transparencies. Was not looking for perfect negatives. I needed that rawness to overcome. So that was how I used light. Okay.
Hi. Well, you an inspiration to all photographers, and this is my first time here, and then I saw your work on the screen. It's very fascinating and very curious to your work of light and black and white photos. And comment how you do it in your work.
How do I do it?
Yeah.
It's Isn't, I should be able to explain that very quickly. But how I do it is I get my materials together. First of all, the thing is to be able to choose the materials that I want to work with. They have to have meaning to me. My materials are metaphors. I rejected silver negative or silver gelatin prints because silver was considered a rich, a kind of a you know, what's termed a noble metal, but it also defined to me a false richness. Whereas soil, where earth, what to me was root. So that was important to me. So try to figure out how to use that was important to me. But I also did a body of work, and that one of the pieces that you saw, Emmett Till, when I said thank you, Emmett Till, was a body of work, and that particular piece was done on mirror. And the reason I did it on mirror was because I was using a newspaper, and I wanted the real-time self to be seen in real time in the mirror with this barrier of Emmett Till between us, because beside it was an American flag, a rumpled American flag, really a sad shape. And the name of that piece is Emmett Till America. But it was a thing I wanted real time mirror, with that separation, like a veil between self and self. Someone asked me because it was difficult to get the image to stick on the mirror. And so someone said, well, how do you do it? I said, well, go to sleep and you dream how to do it. Because I'll tell you, the way I learned how to do it was I kept printing on glass. And I eventually went to one of the hardware stores and I bought acid, something to clean concrete with, not knowing how strong the acid was. And I put my hands in it. I learned, but I tried it and it worked. I was able to get the image to stay on the mirror. So I learned to do it with not putting my hands in it, rubber gloves. It's okay. The point to me is that I can't limit myself. I don't want to limit myself to painting with oil or using a camera in a particular way. I love being able to express myself with what I decide to express myself with. All right. And to me, I love the way light works. And so I love the way light works on things. For example, it's organic. If you go in, fall is coming. All these leaves are going to pile up. And when spring comes, if you go and pick up a leaf, there's a photograph of a leaf under there. It's organic. Go to the beach in the summer, movie watch. You got a photograph. I love the idea that photography is organic. All right. So if I really wanted to do something slow and a long time over a period, I might put an object on something else and put it in the window and leave it for a year, so that when I picked it up, the photograph would be there. It's a demand, figure out ways to work with the tools that are important. That's how I do it. That's what I do. You're welcome. Peter has a question. Oh, you have. I'm sorry. Yes.
Before I ask my question, I apologize for my question, but you made me to be brave enough to say. So how do you pick your subject?
Good question. Someone asked me that, and I said I photograph angels. There are certain people that I interact with in relation to the news media has played a lot of in the decisions that I make and how I do it. Sometimes I'm fighting back with the news media. Sometimes it's just simply, this is someone I admire. I want to be able to do them. And so I'll ask, may I photograph you? And I have photographs that I still want to do. I have the negatives. I eventually would like to do them. I'm not sure when. But I can tell you, these pieces are, they're a joy to make, but they're not a joy to make. All right? They're really, really difficult to make. And I'm working on some things right now. They're light. They're beautiful. I think they're beautiful pieces. They're just pleasant to look at. And I love being able to do that. But I pick people that are a challenge to me sometimes. There's no way of knowing how I'm going to decide to do that. So for the most part, it has been Black men that I thought might be important in the future. I didn't use celebrities. Some of them became celebrities, but I wasn't looking for that. People who are important to me. Mr. Mahajiri. We walked, we talked, he told stories to me. He asked me about me and said, may I photograph you? And keep in mind also, I think that when I was doing these, I had no idea of them other than that show. I never had any idea of them becoming what they're becoming. Okay. Does that answer? Okay, thank you.
Forgive me in advance. I'd like to make an inappropriate request that at the end of your presentation and the questions, if you can return to the image of Emmett Till and just leave it up there for maybe 60 seconds so we can just look at that and
We can do that.
have that in our hearts.
I can do that now.
Thank you.
Yeah. Emmett Till America, 1955.
Can I go? Hi, Don.
Hi, everybody. How you doing?
Fine, I'm great. Good to be here. This is a comment. I've been privileged to know you for, I don't know, ballpark 20 years. And I'm just fascinated by, when people say photographer, it really doesn't do justice to who you are. You, for one thing, you're a poet. I'm seeing your poetry, the poetry of Don Camp manifest right now. And you're also a scientist, and you're also a philosopher. And all of those things are, as well as an artist. So I'm just making a sort of statement of appreciation about the complexity of Don Camp. And you're also a lover, and you're a singer, but you're managing to bring all of those things together in what you present as art. So I just wanted to kind of say that out loud. The other thing I wanted to say out loud is that I'm really appreciating you for what you've said about the newspapers in the late 20th century. I'm old enough to have grown up at a time when, and I was just thinking about this, how, like, for Black people, there was a life we lived that was not visible to the outside world, to the world outside the veil, as Du Bois would say. We understood that. We understood that we were real and that we had depth, but that we weren't going to be seen in the Enquirer or the Bulletin unless somebody had killed somebody. So I just wanted to appreciate you for raising up that part of African-American experience where we didn't formally exist in the minds of a lot of people, but there was always, this incredible, rich life going on.
Yep.
And for you to witness that and do the research to really emphasize that for people, to make that experience more real. I just wanted to appreciate you
Right. Thank
for
you so
saying that.
much. Must
Hey,
say,
hey.
Zadie is a wonderful and absolutely incredible poet. All right. Thank you.
Don, there's not much that's left to be said after all the comments had, and you've just been a joy since I've come to know you and new in my life. But every time I talk with you, every time we sit and talk, and you always remind me that we all are artists, and not because we have iPhones, but the creative force that exists in us all,
Yep.
that we forget sometimes, that is there, and we don't tap into it. But every time I'm in your presence, you remind me of that I am a creative force, that the divinity does live inside of me.
Yep.
And the divine is to create. And that's all I want to say to you. Like, you inspire me and remind me that we all are artists. We just got to tap into it. And every time I'm in your presence, you remind me of that. And it's just inspiring and overwhelming.
Thank you.
I keep thinking about what you said about your sister as photographed by omission. And it reminded me of a philosophy class I took. It was philosophy of art, and philosophy of art is not an undergrad philosophy classroom is not a very polite place. And I remember saying out loud that that poetry doesn't have rules. And another young woman in the class got really angry with me because she was like, poetry absolutely has rules. And she was writing a thesis on poetry. And she's like, and I know better than you. And she did know better than me. But what I meant was that poetry as a whole doesn't have rules,
yeah.
but poems have rules, and collections of poems have rules. So then I was thinking about your experience with, but the great thing about poetry is that you make them, that you decide what they are.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking about that. And then also your expression of mourning maybe, or regret, and your relationship with those rules. And then you showed us also photos of Black women later on. So I guess my question just had to do with that aspect of your practice of art, what the relationship with rules, and maybe when to break them or make new ones.
I think you can break rules when you know the rules so well that you can break them. Before I did any of this, I did a small body of work called On the Hill, and they were silver prints, and they were absolutely beautiful prints. Okay. And I consider myself a master printer of black and white photography. And I figured once I did that body of work, there could be no doubt, if anyone did any research on me, that they could say he's doing this because he can't print. And that to me said, after I did that, then I felt like I could establish my own rules. But it was only after knowing the rules so well that I felt that I could break them. And I had to feel that internally. It wasn't something that I could make up. I had to feel that internally. One, because once I started working on when I started working on Dust Shaped Art, for example, I really recalled everything I'd learned in black and white printing. plus I added to it. So yeah, I think one has to probably really understand what the rules are to be broken.
I would like to invite everybody to come over to the Lee Library where we have one of Don's monoprints there, and you can see it right there. It's not under glass. It's not under anything. It will give you a chance to see some of his work. And we also have another photography exhibit around the corner, Lawrence Saltzman. So if you have a few minutes to stick around, please do. We would love to have you. And we want to thank Don for an absolutely wonderful evening.
Thank you. Thank you.